It's time to take command with former NFL tight end Logan Paulsen and former Commanders beat reporter Craig Hoffman.
What's up? What's happening? Welcome in. Take Command Podcast. That is Logan Paulsen. I am Craig Hoffman. Logan, that was nice for the video, folks. That was a nice head snap. Logan Paulsen. Bang! Here I am.
Bang!
Look at me. Look
Yep.
at this bearded face. Thanks again to Denton Day for doing the post-game show the other night. Appreciate him doing that. But Logan's back, and it is time for a tape review, Logan. We'll get to the defense a little bit later in the show. We'll get more specifically into Jayden Daniels here in about 15, 20 minutes. But let's start off with something that I think stuck out in the game that we didn't necessarily need the tape to understand, but certainly it illuminated it in a major way. And that is, lo and behold, Logan Paulsen. We finally have a team that are masters of situational football to cover. And you played for a lot of different coaches. We've now covered a couple of different ones here. For some reason, this is really hard. And there's a lot happening in a game on a sideline. You know that more than me. But there's a lot happening. But the way that this team just continues to be ready for every situation, from that big long drive at the end of the game, milking the play clock down to under 5 every single play, to Kliff being ready on the play call to know, oh, wait, they're not going to call timeout here? Sick. I have a free pass. Let's use it. OZ for 42 yards. To the way they managed the end of the half. Like, just situation after situation. And I know there's some things you picked up from being on the sideline. This team is ready to go. They executed at a high level, and they're never not prepared.
Yeah, and you can tell they've drilled the heck out of it. You know what I mean? I think, remember when we were at training camp, like, they worked 2-minute drill all the time. They worked red zone a lot. They worked third down. They worked second and long a lot, which has shown up a lot this year, in my opinion. You know, this team is very committed to running the football, and when you're in a second and long situation, how do you get a piece of that back? And I think Jayden's done a great job of that. Kliff's done a great job calling those situations. And so situational football, I think people think, oh, it's, 2-minute, it's end of game, it's red zone, but there's a lot of other situations that this team is prepped. And, when I was with Dan in Atlanta, I think I brought this story up before, like, he really emphasized, these situations. And we'd, have a cut up every Wednesday in the team meeting of situational football. Like, hey, this team did this really well. This team did this really poorly. And I think you see that in how Dan operates on the sideline. Like, he knows the exact situation. I think a really good example of that is when Diami catches that flat, and you're kind of trying to catch the flat, get back into field goal range, and he breaks the tackle and then doesn't get out of bounds. Like, Dan is on the field calling timeout because he understands how important every second there is. And, it'd be interesting to talk to Dan or talk to someone on the staff, Kliff, about whether Diami was supposed to get out of bounds or whether you're okay with him just going for it there. But either way, Dan knows one timeout, call timeout, 11 seconds. And then I think the other thing that I really liked about that situation specifically is 11 seconds is not enough time to run 2 plays if you have to spike the ball, right? So the shot has to be in the end zone. I like the call by Kliff. It's just what I would call double go. So goes on the outside, a dig by number 3, who's a tight end, and that dig can convert to a post or like a through versus middle field open. And that's what it does, right? So it kind of plays like 3 verticals. And the ball placement by Jayden, he obviously understands the situation. Like, only his guy can catch it, and the ball has to be out in a certain timing because you still need to preserve the field goal. And and people say, well, like, every team should know that, and every team does know that, but it's oftentimes, like, I've been in huddles where it's a little bit more frenetic. It's a little bit, like, you need the reminder. You can just tell they're locked in. It's just, this is what needs to happen. This is what we're going to do, and they do it. And I think that drive before specifically those 2 plays right before the half really illuminates a very strong understanding of how to handle those situations.
Yeah, I think that is a great example of this. Both the Diami, I would guess he knows like what he's doing there. Like, hey man, get upfield, get the first down, because he's a little bit short of it after he breaks the initial tackle.
Right.
But I'm guessing they're saying like, hey, after this play, it's probably going to be a timeout. Get what you can. Because if it's the field goal too, like, they're just going to let it run down, call timeout with 5 seconds left, kick the field goal, off you go into halftime. So they might know, like, hey, just get whatever you can. We got enough time here. Bang, bang. And then, yeah, I mean, Terry hits a double move there on that vertical. And it's not like the world's greatest double move, which is just embarrassing for Deonte Banks. Like, what is he doing there? Just totally flat-footed, not really engaged. It's almost like he expects the ball to just get thrown out of bounds. And the second he lurches, like on the first part of the double move, Jayden has that ball out. The anticipation on that throw is crazy, and it's a great catch by Terry, who had the loudest 2 catches for 19 yards that I've ever seen from a receiver in the history of my time covering the league. And yeah, I mean, it's a great play. And then that whole drive, just they managed it really well, and I think you see the preparation, and I guess what I would ask you too, though, is, it's really easy to conceptually say, hey, this is, hey, we're going to get in the huddle. We're going to talk about the situation. We're going to do this. The play clock's running. There's not time for a whole discourse on the situation. What is happening in a huddle there to, what's coming into the quarterback's headset? What's the quarterback relaying to the team? And then what are you thinking about as you get to the line of scrimmage in, let's say, those last 2 plays, that 3rd and 18 that Diami gets, and then the touchdown to Terry?
Yeah, I think they're probably just kind of reviewing, hey, like this is like there is going to be a reminder for the quarterback, and then the quarterback has to remind the huddle. And so that's where I kind of wonder like what the actual coaching point to Diami is there, because obviously you're catching that 5-yard slant, that 5-yard out, kind of understanding you're going to be out of bounds, but when you break the tackle, obviously the situation changes. And then off the timeout, I'm sure there's a lot of conversation from Dan, from Kliff about, hey, like this is what the situation is. This is how we need to manage it. And I think that's what you see there. And again, like coming in when you're just kind of going through the game, it becomes a little bit more challenging because like you got to kind of think of it on your own. And Kliff is going to do his best to remind you in game. And I think Dan might even pop on the headset and just be like, hey, just remember this is this situation. This is what we need to be thinking about. But coming off the timeout, I'm sure that was something that they addressed immediately. It's like, hey, let's take a shot to the end zone. What's your favorite call, Kliff? And he's going to say, oh, double go or whatever it is, because I like the chip help. And then Dan's going to say, hey, remember that ball's got to be incomplete or a touchdown. We can't have something in the field to play because we can't stop the clock. And that's it. And you go out and you rely on the quarterback to execute that. I think we've covered the team long enough, both of us, to understand when quarterbacks don't do that. And it gets a little bit messy and a little bit murky. And even with the reminder, it's not perfect. And so I think, again, it speaks to the staff, everyone understanding what needs to happen, and also speaks to Jayden and his understanding and ability to execute in those moments, because a lot of people in the fog of war kind of lose that perspective. And then the other thing I want to talk about, I think you brought up a great point there with the Terry thing, and that route is really interesting because it's not actually a double move, it's just a vertical go. And for all those young kids at home like watching that route, one thing I'd say is, it's drawn one way on a paper. It's probably drawn as a straight line with a point on one end, right? But once you identify the coverage, like you can put a little bit of seasoning on it. I love the inside stem. I love the vertical push afterwards, because I was talking to Santana and Fred, and it's like he can run an out off of that stem and he can run a dig off of that stem. And I bet a lot of money that he thought he was running an out, to kind of stop the clock there. And it's just enough of a little bit of a thing to kind of make the receiver think about something different, settles his feet, and you're able to run by him and get a perfect ball. So again, for all those young route runners out there, make sure you're working on the stems and the indicators of your stems, because those will be really helpful long-term for you.
No doubt. The other great situational plays or situational handling is the end of game. Obviously, they were able to run out the clock, and I think everyone talks about Kliff and the play call to OZ and the last drive. But the second to last drive, the one that goes 5:48, and then they get the field goal, the way that they milked the clock in that drive was fantastic. Yeah. And there's some cool runs in that drive, and we're going to talk more about the running game in detail here in a second. But just the way that they handled that drive, McNichols with some nice runs, then Chris Rodriguez comes in, and every single play is under 5 on the play clock. And there was even a moment that you saw from the sidelines that shows just how in tune this team is with the clock situation.
Yeah, it was really impressive. Again, the whole end of second half, kind of when they're up, they're milking the clock, they're running the football. Obviously, you could tell that was a priority. But after that big chunk play to OZ, they're kind of down. I think they're inside I forget the exact yard line, but they're close. They're in the high red. and Rodriguez has a nice run. And then on his second run of that sequence, I think it's a duo block, kind of where they line up Bates and Sinnott in kind of that fullback position to the offensive left, and they come back and kind of kick out. And Rodriguez kind of stumbles and bumbles with great ball security. That was the other thing I thought was awesome, was he's got two hands on the football. He's not trying to break tackles. He's just trying to run straight and get what he can. He immediately turns to the sideline as he's walking back to the huddle because of the proximity of the end zone, and goes to Dan and goes like this, like makes the touchdown signal. And Dan, because again, like they could have gotten a first down, like on the next, like, because they were on like a 3rd and 1 from like the 4-yard line. So they could get a first down and then possess the football, take a knee, and end the game. And he looked at Dan and said, "Can I score here?" And Dan was like, "Yeah, go for it." But I do think like that's your 4th string running back who was on practice squad this week. And talk about an awareness of the situation, because there are certain times and certain score differentials where you don't want to score a touchdown. If it's, I forget, there's like a sheet, and I should have probably looked this up before I got on the show, but it's like if you're up by 2 or something like that, a touchdown is like the last thing you want, because they can end up catching up if you miss the extra point. So you want to possess the football. And Dan was like, "Go for it," because they were up by, what was the score? It was 22.
They were up by 5.
Yeah. So you score a touchdown, you're a 2-score game, and there's less than, I think, 30 seconds left in the game. You're totally fine. So I think just, to me, that was really impressive. The end of half scenario is really impressive. But that, again, the awareness of the ball carrier, the intentionality to go talk to the head coach and be like, "What are we doing here?" Because you think about all those times, and I'm sure fantasy owners would be pissed about it. Guys take a knee on the 1-yard line. It's to preserve the win, and that's ultimately the most important thing we're doing. So I thought that was super impressive, and it's something that you don't see on the TV copy. It's something you don't see on when you're watching the All-22. Just a cool little moment of just good, thoughtful football, which I appreciate.
Yeah, I think it came on a 2nd and 5 at the 6 or something like that, and then he winds up an inch short of the goal line. I wish that for Chris's sake he had gotten in, and then of course they take the knees from there after they get the first down anyway. So, but just a cool thing to illustrate just how in touch this team is with all the different situational stuff, how much they think about it, how important it is for him to check in with the head coach. I think there's certain guys that are just like, "I'm going to score." Like, what are the chances it goes wrong? I'm going to score. And they didn't. As for the run game overall, Logan, it looks like they run 1,000 different runs, and it is fun to watch the tape because you're always like, "Wait, who's pulling? Was that GT? No, that was both guards. Oh no, that was guard center. Oh, that was that counter. Was that trap? Was that this? Was that?" There, it feels like there's 1,000 things going on, but to your very trained eye, you're like, "Actually, no, there's about 4 runs."
Yeah.
Why does it look so complicated? And I guess the more important question, as opposed to like, why is it so complicated for me, is what effect does that have on a defense when it feels like there's 1,000 different things happening, but for an offense, really it's kind of simple, and there's only about 4 or 5 that are dressed up different ways.
Yeah, and this is something that I'd have to talk to the offensive coach about. I've talked to Kliff or the O-line coach or Anthony Lynn, the run game coordinator. But it looks like they ran in this game like a lot of bounce is what I would call it. I ran this a lot with Bill when Bill Callahan was the offensive line coach here in Washington. And so basically it's like kind of a gap scheme run, but you kind of identify internal pullers. So, guard, center, guard, or sometimes the weak side tackle based on the spacing of the defensive front, right? So if they're in a 4-down front, and the 3 techniques in a certain spot, the play side guard and the center will pull. If they're in odd spacing and there's a nose over the center, both guards will pull, or whatever, however you choose to deal with that. Or maybe the spacing is even different in the backside guard, backside center will pull. And that's bounce. And I think it's really cool to see how they own this run. They get the pullers communicated, they talk it through, they understand the different adjustments. We got a 6 technique over the tight end, head up over the tight end. The tight end's going to block down. There's a 9 technique. The tight end's going to track through for the linebacker. We're going to kick out. And so on paper, we just talked about a bunch of variations there. That probably looks like 5 or 6 runs, but it's kind of the same run. And then I think bounce inherently has a lot of variation to it anyway, or what I would call bounce. And again, I'd have to talk to Anthony Lynn to make sure that this is exactly how they're coaching it. But to my eye, this is what it looks like. And then they have an ability to, And I don't know the mechanic for this. And this is something that I find really interesting from like a football nerd standpoint, is they can run bounce with a zone read where I'm reading the backside defensive end and Brandon Coleman's going to track through for the weak side linebacker. I can run it with a zone read and a grizz is what I'm going to call it. So you got split backs in the backfield and a tight end on the ball, and he's going to loop around. It's the same run. We've just tagged that extra player to take the spot of the receiver and go block the corner. We can go him with an arc and kind of a pitch action to a bubble, and it's still the same run, but we've added all of this window dressing, and then on top of that we can add an RPO and have Terry run a post, and I can read that hook player instead of having to go block him, and we can throw the football. So bounce is what we're going to call this base run. There's probably 5 variations of it that happen just in game based on front, and then there's probably another 5 or 6 things Kliff can call to make it look different, and we haven't even gotten to formation yet, to kind of, as the other thing, to add even more window dressing and more spice to it. So I think that's why it feels like they're doing a lot. But again, when you go down and you watch the All-22 and you go through the clips, you're like, oh, this is bounce again. And then the other thing that's a little confusing is they run a lot of GT, so guard counter pull, and they do that out of a bunch of different formations. So formations and variations with the same things we just talked about. So I'm sure it feels like a lot is going on every time you watch one of these plays. But the reality of it is they're probably running GT in this game, again, and every game's a little bit different. They probably run GT, they probably run bounce, they probably run some form of Wanda, and again on Wanda they have a lot of variation too, because sometimes they're pulling the center.
Wanda is in like weak side
weak
zone.
Side away from the tight end. So they're running to the open side of the offensive line, like where there's no nub player, no tight end. And sometimes they pull Biotish. Sometimes they just block it regular. Sometimes it's full zone. Sometimes they bring a wham. And those are 3 runs. But there's a lot of little tags and little tweaks to make it feel like a lot. And so I think it's really cool. And so, like, how do you get so much variety in the run game, so many bells and whistles, and, keep it relatively simple, seemingly, for the offense, because they seem to be able to get all the calls out the way they need to get them out.
Yeah, I think the thing, too, that kind of comes up in this game and has come up a couple times is it always feels like then Kliff can find the right one when he really needs it. And so it's like, and I think I said this yesterday on the radio show, I think they have a great ability to clearly understand problems, which allows them to clearly find solutions. And so, like, hey, Micah McFadden's been real annoying in the run game, for instance. Let's add the RPO, and now he's unblocked and he's a read player, and we're giving him a little bit more to think about, and we've taken him out of the equation. Or sometimes, like, hey, these corners are doing a good job coming and fill the run. Okay, well, let's run a jet motion. Yeah. We know based off the situation, they're going to be in man-to-man, and this is probably some of like the second and long stuff you were referencing earlier, right? Like, oh, man-to-man, let's, get in that situation. Jet motion follows the guy across. Well, now that corner's not even there anymore. We literally removed him from the equation. And so there's all these different little things they can do. This backside defensive end's being real annoying. Okay, well, this time let's run Wanda, and instead of him coming and crashing the play, like, let's let him think he is. And then here comes John Bates to mash his face. And next thing you know, John Bates is a pancake block on Brian Burns, and Brian Burns is getting up and yelling at him. It just allows for these little tweaks on all these runs to where, hey, it's been 1 yard, bam, there's a 6, there's an 8, there's a 10. And if teams get really, really aggressive, well, now we're going to add the zone read element. Jayden's going to pull it, and now he's got 15 yards. And it just, the ability to continually tweak and add and manipulate whoever the problem is on the other side, I think is why they've been so consistent running the football this year. And they did this, by the way, without Brian Robinson, which should be mentioned at some point there. I mentioned it. Yeah, and again, they're not, and they're not getting overly complex. Like, they still are staying in this kind of, again, like this 4-3-4 run world. But it just looks crazy. And to your point, but I think for the defense, though, they have to act different. And that's the thing.
That's what I'm saying. It's
simple for us, complex for you is the ideal place to live in for NFL football.
Yeah, because I think the thing that you get out of this that I think is maybe the most important is the O-line and the blocking surface. So, like, whether it's Ben Sinnott or John Bates or, sometimes it's a receiver or Zach Ertz, whoever it is, they know the run so well. They know how to block it versus everything. Like, I remember talking with Kyle and Chris Forrester back, like, when we were pure outside zone in like 2012, 2011. And he was like, there's some value to being able to run outside zone all the time because like, let's say they bring a pirate. You know how to block that. You know the call for it. Let's say they play this front. You know the call for it. And I'm starting to feel like that because the run list seems so tight, that Kliff can call these runs kind of whenever he wants versus anything. And the guys are going to make it come to life no matter what. Now, Kliff does a good job to your point of being like, hey, like, I know the guys will do that, but let's put a little bit of tweak on this. Let's put a little window dressing just to make the fit a little bit different, slow the front down, and let the guys get the angles and let them execute the way we know we can execute. So I think it's this really nice kind of complementary relationship of scheme, like being straightforward and simple and the guys can own it, with an element of this kind of these decorations that add value to the play and make it feel different and quite frankly force the defense to prep different stuff. Because if I'm on defense, I need to prepare GT versus zone read. I also need to prepare straight GT. I need to prepare GT versus RPO. And that might be easy for us to get communicated and get called offensively. And the guys, it's the same run for the offensive line. They know what to do. They can do it with their eyes closed. But it adds so much preparation for the defense. And I think that's what you see here. And kind of to your point, it's like I can get in my bag and, regular GT is a little bit sluggish. Now let's pop it unbalanced like we did against Carolina. And then it's the same run, same surface pretty much, but now we have another wrinkle off of it. So I think that's kind of what you're seeing, which is exciting and fun. And I don't know if Kliff deserves credit for that or Anthony Lynn or the whole staff, but that's a fun, very, like everyone around here kind of reveres Kyle Shanahan as this great mind. Kyle does very similar stuff. And I just love how Kliff came in as kind of this air raid guy, but you see a really nice layered, nuanced approach to the run game.
Yeah, I was joking about this yesterday on the show as well, talking about it more from the protection side of it, where it's like Kliff sometimes, or the staff sometimes, thinks about it in the same way fans do, and actually mean that as a compliment, where it's like, hey, that defensive end's a problem. Why don't they chip him? And it's like, Kliff's like, yeah, that's a good point. Why don't we chip him? Yeah. And so they do. And
can we talk about that more for a second?
Yeah, absolutely.
I know that wasn't on the rundown, but holy cow, watching the Giants, this blows my freaking mind. You have a left tackle who is recently off of San Francisco's practice squad, and you're just going to be like, hey, go win one-on-ones consistently. Look and compare that to what Kliff and the offensive staff is doing here. Very few times is there a play without some type of chip help or some type of slide help or some type of pull help to the perimeter for the offensive lineman. And it helps so much. It helps so much. And then their ability, this is another really nerdy tangent we're getting on here, their ability to then distribute the concept with the chippers, because most people use tight ends. It's a little sluggish getting there, but they use running backs and receivers, and then they can distribute underneath while the deeper routes are stretching the defense vertically. You get a horizontal stretch after the chip, and then you get an Austin Eckler 30-yard gain,
right? Because
it's stretched vertically and horizontally after the chip help. So I don't know, man. I think it's just comparing the two, because the Giants are like, we're going to run our offense, but it's like, man,
no, you're not, because your offense doesn't work if your quarterback's dying.
Correct.
And everything else is secondary to the fact that the quarterback is upright.
Yes.
And it's amazing how many NFL offensive coordinators who are really, really smart, and we'll talk about some of the smart stuff that Dable and Kafka did in this game later, and how Washington was able to eventually adjust to it. But it's amazing how many QB or how many coordinators just don't seem to understand that. It's like, well, we got to do this because we got to do. It's like, no, none of it matters if your quarterback is under pressure all the time, and it definitely doesn't matter if he's on the ground. And I mean, that Eckler play is actually really brilliant in a lot of ways. You get the chip help, and it's Tyler Nubin, the safety, the rookie out of Minnesota. It looks like he's got Eckler man to man, and he first thinks Eckler's just staying in to protect, and so he stays deep. And then all of a sudden, he's got to come down 20 yards off of the ball to try to chase Eckler across the formation, and he can't get there. And by the time he does, Eckler's got the ball and a head of steam, slips a tackle, slips another, and next thing you know, he's got 30 yards. And it's just like, yeah, that's at first I thought they blew the coverage. They didn't blow the coverage.
Right.
The right guy had him. He just had to come from 25 yards away, and that's never going to work against a guy as slippery as Austin Eckler.
Yeah, 100%. And again, it's the pass game for the Washington Commanders is not overly complicated. It's people run these concepts, but the way they run them and the detail that they run them with and the speed that they get and the urgency that they get to the concept it creates space, and then you couple that with the protection plan, and it allows for this vertical distribution of the field in this really nice way. So like you watch again, we're going to compare them to the Giants. The Giants are running 5-man pro, 6-man pro, and they can't get into the defense very well because the rush is just crumpling the pocket, and Daniel Jones can't see it, so he's got to check the football down. Here, it's like there's this nice pocket. The offensive line for the Commanders is doing a great job. They're doing a great job. And Kliff's doing a great job elevating them and making sure that there's good chip help, there's good slide help. We've talked a couple of times, like I think back to the Baltimore game, where they're, pulling Biotish to help the tight end, and they've got a full slide, like doing some really fun, cool, innovative stuff. And it allows for deep shots down the field. It allows for Jayden to see that beautiful crosser to Noah Brown. Like, those are the things that set those plays up. And I think it's stuff you see Detroit doing, stuff you see San Francisco doing. High-powered offenses do this stuff because there has to be vertical influence on the defense to create space underneath.
Take command. That is Logan Paulson. I am Craig Hoffman, and let's talk about the quarterback play in this game for the Washington side of it. Just a nice other, easy day, 200-plus yards, 2 touchdowns, no picks. I think he threw 7 incompletions on the day. Chill day at the office for Jayden Daniels. That's what it looks like on paper. Then you watch some of the film, and some of the ways he elevates this offense, again, show up. And I feel like in many ways, Logan, this was kind of like what the average game is going to be for Jayden Daniels. A lot of accurate balls, a lot of good decisions, maybe misses a couple of reads here and there, but also makes up for those missed reads with 3 or 4 plays that just absolutely crush a defense's soul. There's one play where Chris Rodriguez misses a block. Jayden just sidesteps, and then all of a sudden C-Rod's out in front making a lead block as Jayden scrambles for double digits. And you're like, that should be a sack. It's not. It's a 15-yard gain. And so those little things just add up, break a defense's back, and that's how you score 27 points. They could have obviously scored 30 if they wanted to run it in at the end. And yeah, man, where do you want to start with Jayden? Which category of decision-making, accuracy, reads, where do you want to start?
I think it's, I don't know, probably decision-making to me. I think that's a thing that just has been super impressive. And I've said this a couple times now on other stuff that I've done. It's hard to overstate how good his decision-making consistently is. Because you expect he's a rookie, you expect him to not see stuff very well. And again, you got to give credit to Kliff. Kliff's done a great job scheming up the offense. We've talked about how he's kind of done a good job of making sure the first read is open. Guys are winning for him. Terry, Zach, the screens to Austin. Those are kind of, you can trust those guys to win in man-to-man situations. That's been great to see. Noah Brown's resurgence or ascension as the second wide receiver, or kind of explosive play weapon here has been really impressive. There's a lot of cool stuff going on, but Jayden is just super protective of the football. And I think the thing that is maybe the most impressive to me is just kind of his ability to say oh, it's not there. I'm going to scramble. I'm going to get 5 yards. I'm going to get 6 yards. There's a free runner. I'm going to make that guy miss and get a first down. And that stuff is so incredibly valuable in terms of keeping the offense on schedule. So not only is he making good decisions as a runner, he's making good decisions as a passer, and he's making kind of big time throws. I talked about that throw to Noah Brown where he's kind of cutting across the middle.
Dude, what the hell was that?
I was on the field and I was standing right behind him. So kind of near, in the end zone. And it's cool to see because you get to see kind of what he's seeing. And you could see the crosser coming into his vision, and McFadden is dropping out of there like a bat out of hell. And I'm like, that's covered. But I think his understanding of what NFL open is and body position of the defender is starting to come alive a little bit. You saw it on the touchdown to Terry, and I think you see it really acutely here. I'm going to throw it right over that linebacker's ear. I'm going to protect the receiver from that corner that's kind of getting some depth. And the ball is right there. And that was a beautiful throw, beautiful decision, big time opportunity. And he's making those big time moments. And I think the offense in general is doing a good job of making sure you don't have to do it all the time. And that's where we'll talk about this on Thursday, but that's where the Pittsburgh stuff becomes really interesting because they're going to change this dynamic, I think, a little bit. But yeah, that ability has been really impressive to me.
Yeah, that throw to Noah Brown where he just understands, like, yeah, this linebacker's going to the spot, but he can't see. And if I put
Yeah.
the ball by his ear hole when his head's facing the other way, like, he's not a threat. It's just a ridiculous throw. I know Nikki pulled the L22 and put it on Twitter. If people want to go watch that, just go to at Nikki Javala and scroll back in her tweets a little bit. But I mean, yeah, shout out to the great Nikki Javala. Yeah, it's really impressive the accuracy on also just like keeping the ball away from trouble. Hey,
Yeah.
this is a quick game, but like if I put the ball on the right shoulder, like my guy's going to take a hit and it might be an incompletion. Ball might pop up in the air. If I put it on my left shoulder, like I can peel him away from contact. He's still going to get hit, but like he's going to be able to securely catch the ball and go down. It's little things like that just keep the offense on schedule. And then, I think, like you said, the decision making of when to run was really good in this game. And it's almost like it feels like he has the ability to almost pause the tape in real time, if you will. Like when you're watching the All-22, at least for me, like there are times where I'm like, okay, I want to see what's happening right now. And you hit pause and it's like a snapshot. And it's like, okay, this is where guys are. Here's some space. And it almost feels like he sees the full field like that in real time from the pocket, because his understanding of I need to be looking here, or hey, if all these guys are covered, then the space must be over. Like, wait a second. If 7 guys are here, then there's no one over here and I can run over there. Like it's that snapshot in time and then the decision making and processing to know what to do with it that I think is it's not just like supernatural for a rookie. It's elite for any quarterback in the league.
Yeah, and I think if you're going to talk about that ability, is the offensive line's done a great job of giving him time to do that and just play and do his thing. And I think, I forget it was Wiley or Allegretti post game. I think John Keim said something about how like as long as we're doing our job, he can do his job. Yeah. And that group has just done a great job. And it's everybody. It's the whole offensive ecosystem that allows that, because like I look at Daniel Jones, and I think Daniel Jones actually played a pretty good football game. I think there's things that he does well when you watch the film of him, but the offensive line just collapses around him. And everyone's like, oh, he's not making this throw. It's like, you can't. There's like no space for him to do it. And I think like when you look at the depth and the width of the pocket, in addition to just making sure there's no free runners, like the O-line's doing a great job, and it allows him to kind of get back there. And there are times, he's done a great job, I think, recently of being on rhythm. There are times where he's a little off rhythm, but you don't feel like stressed for him. Even the check down to Austin Eckler, like they do a great job. It's 5-man pressure. They pick it all up. He loses a little bit of ground. The deeper route concept's dead, and he's able to kind of wait for Austin to like clear the other crosser and throws a great ball to him. And you're just like, that doesn't happen unless the protection's excellent. And he has to see it and get the ball there. But so it's this cool, like it's just good offensive football, which is a lot of fun.
Pop quiz. I don't know if you've seen this, but I've done this to Anthony. I did this to Michael Phillips yesterday. But you should be the best one at this because you've watched the All-22 at this point with your eye. What percent of snaps did the Giants blitz on Sunday?
It felt like a ton. I'd say over 50% is what I would say.
You're correct. It was 60%.
Yeah.
And the thing is, like, to those of you that have not watched the All-22 or have not listened to my radio show, that might be shocking to you because the Commanders allowed 5 pressures in 25 dropbacks against a 60% blitz rate. So, like, when you're talking about the offensive line playing at that high of a level, like, this is against the best team in the NFL sacking the quarterback this year. They allowed 0 sacks. They allowed a 20% pressure rate. Dexter Lawrence, for the first time this year, had no pressures on 19 pass rushes. That's crazy.
Yeah, and so that's a couple things there. One, that's a great protection plan. That's backs and tight ends and receivers knowing how they impact the protection. And also, credit to Kliff, man. They ran the ball 37 times. And a lot of those blitzes come as run-stopping pressures, So, like, it's everything. It's I think about last year as a great point of comparison for this offense where you're throwing the ball a ton and you're getting those pressures, those 5-man pressures versus 5-man protections, and a lot more pressures are going to show up as a result. Here, just managing, keeping the easy stuff easy and the hard stuff hard when it has to be hard, and just deleveraging the quarterback and deleveraging the offensive line. Like if there's one thing any offensive coordinator needs to take away from this season, it's those are the 2 hardest positions on the offense. Like, if you can make it easier for the quarterback and make it easier for the O-line by running the football, by play action pass, by whatever means you want to utilize, screens, however you want to do it, like your offense will be much more effective because of it.
One question I did want to ask you is on the pressure front. I feel like there are a couple times that he invites pressure. It's like 2 or 3. But on the 2 that I'm thinking of, it causes him to miss guys that wind up wide open in the end zone. And of course, to be very clear, he played a fantastic game. This is just like hey, what's the next step for Jayden? Because he's only 9 games into his career, and somehow he's going to get better. There's a couple of plays where he rolls out, and if he just stops rolling, he resets his feet in the pocket. Like, cool, we're safe now. Like we've dodged a little bit of pressure. We've taken, the O-line's cleaned it up. And instead he gets on the edge and say like Wiley's blocking the edge and he's got the inside sealed, and then Jayden gets out, and now all of a sudden you've invited pressure. He takes a hit. And on one of those in the fourth quarter, I think it was, I can see in my notes if I have a timestamp on it. But it's the 3rd and 4 with 43 seconds to go in the third quarter. And they wind up settling for a field goal on that drive. And Diami winds up wide open in the back of the end zone. And he kind of moves. And if he just resets his feet, he can hit Diami. Instead, he rolls out, invites pressure. He winds up getting hit on the play. And it's one of the ones on the broadcast where Sanchez is just like, hey, man, that's dead. Like, you gotta go. You got to know when the party's over. And I wonder if that is something that this week the coaches will be like, hey, just because you get flushed initially doesn't, like, either go or see if you can find a safe space, keep your eyes down the field. And that's an area he's already grown tremendously in this year. But I think that's another very specific opportunity for him to maybe create some big plays and second actions.
Yeah, and I think that's something like, when you watch the Cincinnati game from this weekend and see how Joe Burrow is so dexterous in the pocket, like that's a skill. That's a skill that takes time to learn and develop. And I do think if there's one, criticisms may be hard, but like, coaching emphasis, it is
I think that's a good way to put it.
It's like, hey man, like this is clean. We're clean in the pocket. And that's really hard. That's really hard for quarterbacks to learn. It's really hard for them to get good at it. I think it's probably especially hard for a guy that's athletic as Jayden, because like if there is a pressure, I can become a runner and I become dangerous, but there is something to be said for small, subtle movements, quick movements in the pocket. Tom Brady obviously was excellent at that. And so I think, that's something he can get better at for sure. And it's a fine line I think you want to walk as a coach, because he is so good at making those decisions as a scrambler. So you don't want to say like, hey man, like try to stay in the pocket here, because like good things happen when he leaves it. But also you want to be like, hey, we can get better at feeling this and not making a big move to escape, but rather a subtle kind of adjustment in the pocket to maximize this opportunity and maximize your vision down the field.
I also wonder if the coaching point is kind of, you need to read the edge player. Like if you're going to escape outside the pocket and loop around, you can't do that if the player's already out there. And like that was the thing that I think happened, especially on that play. I know there's one other that I'm trying to remember when it was in the game, but where the same thing happens though, where the edge is sealed, or like shouldn't say the edge is sealed. Like it's one thing if the edge player comes back inside, like loops on their rush, and all of a sudden that edge is sealed, and now you've got an open edge, and there's no one, like a linebacker is going to have to come from the second level, or safety is going to have to come down to get you pressure. But if that edge player is already outside your offensive lineman, then you're either setting him up to get called for a holding penalty because he expects that he's in good position, or you're now running away from where you're blocked up. And I wonder if that's kind of the way that they could present it to him, where it's like, hey, we want you to be aggressive. We want you to look to scramble. We don't want you to run into pressure. And that's actually what you're doing there.
Yeah, and I think you look at the sack fumble that he had against Tampa Bay earlier this year, like where he gets a little bit of pressure and he goes to vacate, and the defensive end, I forget who it is just rushing really high. Like teams will do that to you on purpose. And I think a team that will do it is Pittsburgh. Like they're good at kind of giving you these false indicators of space, and TJ Watt is going to rush really, really high. If you step back at all, like he's going to get a sack force fumble. And so I think that's something that definitely needs to be addressed. And has he improved at it? I think so. I think he's gotten better at it.
Definitely.
I think he's gotten way better. And I think that, it'll still pop up because he's still learning. And I think we forget that he's still so young in his professional career. But yeah, I definitely think that you want to make sure you emphasize that. And you want to kind of, again, it's a fine line in terms of coaching it, because he has been excellent at making decisions about when to leave the pocket, about elevating the offense that way. but it's also like, hey man, let's continue to cultivate this other element of our game. And again, I think Kliff's done a great job. Again, I'm going to say this for the 5th time on this podcast, of having a protection plan that allows him to be him in the pocket. And the way they coach the pass sets allows him to do that. They're not asking him to be Joe Burrow, where we're going to vertical set the tackles. We're going to, make him navigate in a tight space that way. We're going to set the dish, very similar to kind of how Drew Brees' pockets used to look. The tackles are going to be a little bit more aggressive. The guards are going to be a little bit more aggressive. There's depth and width. And so it allows him to operate and be him. So I also think like there's coaching there too, understanding who your guy is and how to maximize what he does.
Anything else from Jayden's game that we want to touch on before we flip over to the defense?
Yeah, just impressed, man. Impressed with him each week. Impressed with his development. And again, I've said this too. Impressed with Kliff. Impressed with the offensive staff. Like, it's a very symbiotic relationship in terms of how they've developed him. And I think everyone deserves a lot of credit. And we'll talk about this more on Thursday, but they've got a huge challenge this week versus Pittsburgh, and I can't wait to talk about that.
Take command, Craig Hoffman, Logan Paulson talking Commanders defense. And it didn't start great statistically, Logan, even if the point total was kept relatively low. Commanders gave up 115 yards in the first quarter rushing the football. Yikes, that's not good. They did ultimately make some adjustments, but let's try to look at what went wrong in that first quarter, and whether it's decision making, that Joe Witt was like, hey, like, go ahead, run the football. We don't think that you can finish drives, whether it was bad execution, like what confluence of circumstances came together that the Giants were so successful, especially when they've been a pretty hit or miss running football team overall this season.
Yeah, actually, when I went back and watched it, I was really impressed schematically, especially after that first drive where they went 3 and out. So like the second drive, the 6-play 50-yard drive, 55-yard drive, and then the third drive, the 16-play 73-yard drive, just in terms of their run game construction and what they were able to get to. And what I mean by that, it's not like they're running, spaceship runs, but the runs that they are running are just hard to fit. And I will say also, like, Joe Witt Jr.'s in like a lot of two shell, he's kind of inviting you to run the football. And so and again, even when he gets into single high stuff, like when the quarterback can run it the way Daniel Jones can run it, it opens up a can of worms in terms of your traditional run fits. So one play that comes to mind specifically was they're running like Wanda. Everyone runs Wanda, open side run away from the tight end. And they're bringing the tight end back on a sift to cut out the defensive end. And so it's off his zone read action, and Daniel Jones acts like he's pulling it. And so the weak side linebacker, who I think is Frankie Louvu, has to play out. He has to, because you're kicking out the end, and then you have like a bubble kind of over here to the offensive left. So you have to play out, or else you're short, and the quarterback's going to run for 100 yards. So he does that. They hand the wand off. Now you've got a really favorable box. You've got 5-on-5, 5 blockers for 5 run defenders, and the running back does a really good job of kind of getting skinny, finding a crease, and ends up being a 10-yard gain. When you add the quarterback in there, and then you add a little bit of the sift action, a little bit of the bubble, a little bit of the numbers, a little bit of the jet sweep, it just changes your run fits and takes people out of the box. And when you take people out of the box, run fits become more challenging. And so I think that's ultimately what I saw is credit to the Giants. Run scheme was very, very effective and very well coached and very well thought out. And I also think Joe Witt Jr. was kind of like, go ahead, run the football.
Yes.
We're okay with that.
100%. And so I actually did something a little different with how I watched this defensive tape. Logan, we got columns on the notes here.
Oh gosh.
And that column right there is the box count. It's not on camera. There we go. That skinny one right there. There we go.
Craig, you're taking like big boy notes now. Look at you.
I know. It's a box count, because I was like, did they just start putting 8 in the box? And is that how they solved the problem? Nope, it wasn't. They didn't change anything. So that first drive, they had 7 in the box on every play.
Yeah.
Then it was like 6, 7, 8, 6, 8, 8. And then those like the heaviest box counts they had all game. And the Giants just ran all over them. And then there was they eventually were like, let's try a play action pass, fumble. And then the next drive is the 16 play drive. And there's like 6, 7, 6, 7, 6, 8, 7, 7, 7, 7. Like, they're not playing 8 in the box. And they never changed that in the second half. Those numbers stayed the same. And it's the same nickel, big nickel, all that stuff. And they found ways eventually to get there. But I do think it is the what we talked about is like the Giants aren't good enough to go 16 plays more than once a game. So they got their one, and that was it.
Yeah, so I think this is a really interesting kind of football philosophy point. So, for example, on that first drive where there's the fumble, like they could have run the ball 10 consecutive times and scored a touchdown. They could have done that, right? Very easily could have done that.
It seemed like it was on the table.
Right. But offensive coordinators get a little antsy. And Joe Witt Jr. was like, I'm just going to be patient, as patient as I can be. We're going to stay in two shell, and you're going to screw it up. And what do? They screwed it up. So credit to Joe Witt Jr., right?
Yeah. By the way, on that drive, you were ready for the down and distances of every single play on that drive?
Yeah, let's go for it.
1st and 10, 2nd and 6, 1st and 10, 1st and 10, 1st and 10, 1st and 10. There's no more plays they fumbled. Yeah, they faced second down once on a drive that they scored 0 points.
And they were all runs, if I remember correctly.
That is correct.
And so as an offensive coordinator, I am kicking myself. If I'm Dayball or Kafka, whoever's calling the plays right now, like I am pissed because like I overthought it. I should have just kept running the football and just said, you will get out of this two shell look at some point and I will be happy and then I'll throw the football. But I couldn't do it. And I think there is something to that. It's maybe they didn't technically screw something up, but like the offensive coordinator got impatient and that was the call. The other thing I'd say too is this to me is a perfect example of why game flow is so important versus teams that want to run the football. Because nothing actually changed except for the number of rushing attempts in the second half. Because what's the score? 21-7. You need to score a lot of points very quickly. I have to throw the football. And to me, like if Joe Witt Jr., Dan Quinn clearly understand that the offense is good enough right now to score a lot of points and that teams are not going to be able to sit in these run-heavy formations and run the football the way they want to. And that's exactly what happened. The difference, nothing really schematically. It's the type of play calls that the Giants were engaged in going into the second half because the score is what it was.
Yeah. The other thing that I did want to ask you about in terms of the adjustments, because they did get a lot better. And there were still a decent number of run attempts after that first quarter that the average is, I think, below 4 a carry. It's like 3.5 a carry, something like that for the rest of the game. Did they do anything differently up front? Like Newton makes a couple of plays, Payne's involved in a couple of things. Did they slant? Did they start twisting? Did they start like what did they do to get out of it in the way, like even if they were still getting 5-6 yards on some pops, like the 10s, the 20s, those went away in the second half. Why did that happen?
Yeah, I think honestly, quite frankly, just because they didn't run the ball with the same, like there's something that I think you see with Washington. To be an effective rushing team, usually you have to kind of commit to it and you have to kind of get in a rhythm running the football. And I think you see that with the games that Kliff calls and, when we have over 30 carries, like how he's able to kind of manage the second half of football games by running the football. And I think when you look at this game, specifically in the second half, like the offense just isn't in the same rhythm, right? There's no quarterback runs in the second half. There's none of that stuff that's going on. You know what I'm saying? It's just a different vibe. And because they're trying to throw the football a little bit more. And that it kind of fell right into what Joe Witt Jr. wanted. Like we're going to be in these different coverage structures and the runs you are going to run out of these kind of predominantly passing personnels and formations are runs that we're okay with. And I really believe, like in terms of first to second half, guys made plays, A, and B, I didn't really see anything definitively different about it. I just thought like the emphasis by the Giants changed and it kind of fell into what Joe Witt Jr. wanted, basically.
Yeah, there were a couple of times in the first half where the Giants got into like 12 and 13 personnel. Yeah. They're basically in goal line in their own, like at their own 23-yard line or something like that. And they got some big runs out of that. They got bigger personnel in the field. Michael Walker's out there a little bit. So it is, you can't really live like that if you're down 14 points in the second half. And
Correct.
So it's definitely a big part of it. The other thing that I thought changed dramatically first half to second half, and this is, an interesting talking point as well, is they get to that big long drive at the end of the third quarter into the fourth. They finally remembered they had Malik Neighbors.
Yeah.
It was wild how uninvolved he was for the first basically 3 quarters of this game. Was that a play calling thing? Was that a Daniel Jones thing? Or was that a Washington doing a good job until all of a sudden he comes alive? And even then, like they didn't give up any explosive plays to him. He had, I think, 9 catches in game, but it was like for like 50 something yards.
Yeah.
This is not the 11 or 15 catches for 180 or whatever he had the first time around. So what did Washington do to kind of keep him under wraps, both when he wasn't involved and they were able to keep him out of the game, and then when he was involved, but only so damagingly?
Yeah, I think it's really a credit to the general improvement of the team. Like when you think about the first matchup, you get in man-to-man situations and we're not passing stuff off or picking each other. Or linebackers are running into corners and we're not tackling super well. And I feel like that was the difference. And I know those are like fundamental. Like, are you communicating? Do you know where your guys are? Like that is different from the first matchup. Are you tackling better? Yes, because there's no yak opportunities for him. So you're going to run a bunch of hitches, a bunch of digs. Like, if I tackle you, like, that's fine. Like, you're not going to have a lot of yards. And so I think that was the thing, is like the defense in general, I thought, or I think, is just getting better week on week at the basic stuff in the defense. Now, Joe Witt Jr. will throw a wrinkle here, throw a wrinkle there. I love the blitz package that they have with Frankie Louv and Bobby Wagner, the double A stuff. I love how aggressive the edge guys are in terms of attacking up the field because they know they're going to get pressure inside, and they're all rushing really well together. I think the coverage is communicating better in the back end, but they tackled better, they communicated better, they played to their leverages better, and Malik Neighbors is going to have 9 catches for 54 yards, and cool. Like, I can live with that. If you can live with that, I can live with that. And I think that's ultimately just good, sound defense. Now, there's the coverage bust to Theo Johnson up the seam, kind of we're in that quarters. And again, you'd have to talk to someone specifically about what their rules are there, because that's the second time this year they've kind of messed that 3 verticals up in that same quarters coverage. And that's a little bit different because it looked like they were free releasing the back to the left. So the quarter safety kind of has to hold there. But I don't know. But there are still issues, is my point. But I think on a down-to-down consistency level, it's better and it's improving. And that's why you see Malik Neighbors somewhat contained in the game.
I think the other thing that's worth asking is they've now gone 3 straight games holding the opposing quarterback under 100 yards into the fourth quarter. And then in the fourth quarter, they've given up significantly more. Obviously, Carolina, they didn't. I guess they lost their shutout. But at that point, that was, they were up so much, it's hard to really get too upset about it or even include it in this data set, if you will. But Chicago explodes in the fourth quarter. New York is able to score. The offense obviously shuts it down. So they never have the ball with a chance to take a lead. But Washington's defense does give up more in the fourth than they had previously. So is there what are teams figuring out? What's happening? Is like all of a sudden are you seeing signs that guys are tired? Like, I don't know. I'm just throwing stuff at the wall. Like what do you see as the open-ended, non-leading version of the question where teams have been able to get stuff in the fourth quarter these last couple of weeks?
It's hard. It's hard to answer that question because I don't know if anything drastically is happening. I think it's the one thing I would point to is that in all these games, you're going to see more passing opportunities. You're going to be more aggressive. And I think that does stress you more. And the defensive line's maybe a little bit fatigued heading in the fourth quarter because the pressure's not there the same way. Drives, I think that's the other thing. Drives are a little bit longer because teams are throwing the football a little bit better. They find explosive play opportunities. So that's the thing that kind of is a general thread that jumps out. But that's kind of a general NFL thing.
Right.
You see more passes. You're going to have more passing yards. You're going to have passing in general leads to more explosive plays just by the nature of the way the game is constructed at the moment. So that's kind of what I'd say. Is there anything that I'm seeing specifically from the defense outside of like a couple coverage issues, like coverage busts? Like there was one where like Mike Sanders still has a, I think it was a dig. I forget what the exact route combination. Like the tight end is
running. This is the 3rd and 9 that he just like kind of gives Neighbors the first down. Yeah. What the heck happened there? That
looks like a man coverage to me. And it looks to me like he's expecting some type of plug help inside. But I don't know who the plugger would be, if the defensive end's supposed to drop, if Frankie Louv is supposed to fake the rush and then fall underneath that, which is entirely possible. But those things kind of still pop up every once in a while where like we're obviously not on the same page. Like either Sanderson's not or Frankie's not, or the guy covering the tight end should bump that off and we should be in that window. Like there was some issue there, and that pops up. In the fourth quarter there. The seam to Theo Johnson, that pops up in the fourth quarter there. So whatever the issue is, like those are 2 seemingly communication issues that where guys aren't exactly sure what's going on. So I don't have a good answer. Again, you're seeing more passes. Maybe you're more exposed in those situations, but there does seem to be at those critical junctions, like just a little bit of like, what exactly are we doing type situations.
Right. And I guess the follow-up to that to close us out here would be like, is that something that if you are, I know Pittsburgh wants to run the mess out of the football, but pick another team down the road that is more willing to pass. Is this something you feel like you can expose earlier in the game?
Yeah.
Or is it too high risk when the rushers are fresh and whatever other circumstances might be happening early in the game?
I think a great example of that's Cincinnati. And obviously this defense is way better than they were against Cincinnati in terms of handling coverage busts and stuff. But when you're kind of built for it, like you can do it whenever you want, you know? And I think the one thing I'll point out is like when you watch the Bears game and you see kind of how effective the defense was there, they're effective because they're doing what they're supposed to do, but also because Caleb is not playing with confidence from the pocket. And when you get a guy who's confident and deliberate and locked in from the pocket, like Joe Burrow, who's obviously like a top 3 quarterback in the NFL, like he'll pick you apart. And that's not an indictment of this group. That's kind of true of every defense in the NFL.
Right.
Like, I think we've had this conversation before. Like, I always get incredibly frustrated when I'm watching any offense and they miss open opportunities or tight window throws, because I'm like, that's not good defense. That's just bad offense. And unfortunately, the way the NFL is ruled at the moment in terms of like, you know, the things they prioritize, it favors the pass. And so like, it's just really hard to defend at the moment. And we've been very fortunate over the course of the season to play quarterbacks that can't pick you apart from the pocket outside of one, really. And so
two, Lamar had quite the half to Zay Flowers.
Yeah, that's great. I forgot about Lamar. My bad, Lamar. You know, you're in that same group.
Tried to wipe it from your memory.
Yeah, I've tried to wipe it from my memory. But when you see a quarterback that's capable of doing that, I don't care how good you are, every defense is going to, like, look at what Lamar does every week. Like every week to everybody. Look what Joe Burrow does every week to everybody. Like, you could be a top-rated defense. You play one of those guys, you're going to struggle. So, yeah, I think this is something that definitely, if you play a better passer, is going to be an issue.
Yeah. So the good news is there's not a lot of guys like that on the schedule. You know,
it's exciting.
I think one of the interesting ones, I think like Russ throwing deep, you know, he'll throw it. Like that could be interesting this week for sure.
Yep.
You know, Jalen Hurts, like he'll throw it deep. If there's one-on-one opportunities, AJ Brown against St. Jude's,
you have studs on the outside, right?
Yeah, they're gonna throw it, and that is something that I think when we talk about like Benjamin or Mikey or Noah, like these guys have done a good job overall. They have definitely given up some stuff underneath, but none of them have gotten like beat over the top really badly in a long time. But I also don't feel like, you know, this is a credit to them, right? They haven't given up a lot of opportunities, but also they haven't faced quarterbacks that are super aggressive in throwing them. And like Jalen, if he thinks AJ Brown is covered, but it's one-on-one, he's like, that dude's open.
Yeah.
And so that's going to be a different challenge in the next couple of weeks to really test the ball skills and the ball's in the air one-on-one skills of these guys in a way that they haven't been tested in a while. And Russ to George Pickens is a guy who will do that as well. So going to be a lot of fun to watch on Sunday. We'll preview that coming up on Thursday. Logan, we've made it through the podcast taping. It is now 10 a.m. on Tuesday morning. We have not had a Commanders trade yet. If that changes, we'll have a reaction on the radio show at 4 o'clock. And then we will post some reaction to that tomorrow as our Take 5. Or if they don't do anything, we'll post that reaction tomorrow as our Take 5. But that is where we're at right now. We've been talking for an hour, so that's probably good for one show. That's Logan. I'm Craig. Wherever you're watching or listening right now, love it if you hit that subscribe button. If you're watching on YouTube, hit like as well. Because again, if you've made it this far and you didn't like it, well, that's kind of weird, to be honest. I'll see y'all on the radio at 4. Logan will see you over on Command Center and everything he's doing for the Commanders. And we'll see you Thursday back here for a Pittsburgh game preview on Take Command. Thanks for watching this clip of Take Command, which has a brand new home.
That's right. You can watch on YouTube at the Team 980.
You can also listen to full episodes in the free Odyssey app, which is now enabled with Apple CarPlay. So we'll just, follow you around.